This video is about employment and unemployment. You might think that you just need to not have a job to be unemployed, but the economic definition is that you need to be able to work, willing to work, and actively seeking employment, but not currently in a job. And so this wouldn't count just, for example, students, people who are retired, or anyone unable to work because of their health. Now, we usually look at unemployment as a percentage, and with this we're looking at the unemployment rate, and so that's the proportion of the labour force which is out of work, and that's calculated by the number of people who are unemployed divided by the total number of people in the labour force multiplied by 100. And when we talk about the labour force, we're looking at everyone who's economically active, so that's everyone who's employed plus everyone who's unemployed. Measuring unemployment across the whole country can be quite a tricky task, and so we have two main approaches for trying to do this. The first is using the claimant count, and that measures the number of people who are actually claiming job seekers allowance at a particular point in time. That's quite a convenient way of measuring unemployment. We pretty much have these numbers readily available, and so it would seem quite a sensible way of counting the number of people who are unemployed. But the problem with this is it is often going to understate the numbers of people who are unemployed, because not everyone who's unemployed will necessarily claim benefits. It might be because they're ashamed and they don't want to, or it might just be because they're still getting around to it. Probably a bigger problem is that part of the point of measuring unemployment is to make comparisons across countries and over time. And if the criteria for claiming these benefits is different or it changes over time, which it often does, it makes these comparisons fairly useless. So we more commonly use the labour force survey, and this is based on a large number of households. We take a sample and we count those who are not in a job, who have actively sought work in the previous 4 weeks, and who are available to start work immediately. The downside to this, though, is that unlike the claimant count, the data isn't readily available, so there's a time and cost element involved to gather it. And also, as with any data set, it's going to be subject to sampling errors, although you would hope with such a large size of sample that would minimize this. A really good discussion to be had about unemployment is that its impact on an economy will depend on the cause, because there are a number of different types of unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is caused by downturns in the economic cycle and a lack of aggregate demand in the economy. And this is probably the most damaging one across the economy as a whole. So when there's a recession, this hits people's disposable income, and it means lower consumer expenditure. Businesses will need to produce less output as a result, and they'll demand fewer workers because of this. Structural unemployment comes about because of changes in the pattern of economic activity in a country. And so in the UK, as we've shifted from a more industrial economy to one that's more service-based, there's plenty of examples of this structural unemployment. Jobs being lost in coal mining is just one of them. Seasonal unemployment is when industries have lower demand at particular times of year. And so that could be lower demand for lifeguards in seaside resorts during the winter, or possibly bar workers who won't be needed as much after a busy festive period over Christmas. And frictional unemployment comes about when people are in between or just looking for jobs. And that's probably the least damaging out of the different types of unemployment, because you want a bit of this to be going on for a more dynamic labour market. As you can probably imagine, unemployment is hugely damaging for an economy, because fundamentally it's just a total waste of scarce resources. Labour is one of our factors of production, and having it unused is not good. Output will be lost as a result, which means lower gross domestic product, fewer goods and services being produced, and a reduced material standard of living as a result of that. Now, the knock-on impact of that as well is that it can lead to a negative multiplier effect. Now, the multiplier being when an injection into the circular flow of income results in a greater final increase in aggregate demand, because one person's spending becomes another's income. And the same thing works in reverse with the negative multiplier. Fewer people employed means fewer spending money, which reduces business incomes and feeds into further unemployment. And there's also going to be a fiscal cost for the government of unemployment as well, as they will need to automatically spend more money on job seekers allowance if more people are unemployed, and simultaneously fewer people in work means reduced tax revenue for the government as well. So this seems like a fairly bleak picture, but evaluation is about trying to consider both sides, and there might be some benefits of unemployment as well. Now, for one, it increases the pool of available labour for firms, and so that puts them in a better bargaining position, and not only giving them a broader pick of workers, but also potentially reducing their wage bill as well. It might encourage people to start their own business or further their education if they can't find employment, and that can be good for the economy and productivity in the long run. And you could argue that when unemployment is very low, this can cause the economy to overheat and result in damaging inflation. So some unemployment might be useful in keeping this under control.